Hi, grade 4. So today I'm going to be reading you chapter 4 of The People of Sparks. And this chapter is called The Doctor's House. The sky had turned a deep blue now, almost black. At one edge shone a streak of brilliant crimson. In the houses of the village, one window and then another began to glow with a flickering yellow light. They walked and walked. Each time they came to a doorway or a gate in a wall, or stairs leading upward. Lena hoped this might be the house. Back in Ember, where she'd had the job of messenger, she'd been a tireless runner. Running was her greatest joy. Tonight, it was hard just to walk. She was so tired her feet felt like bricks, but Dr. Hester walked on, with the boy trotting ahead of her sometimes and sometimes lagging back to stare at Lena and Mrs. Mordeaux and Poppy, until they came to the outer edge of the village. There, standing somewhat apart, was a low-roofed house, except for a glimmer of light on its two windows, reflecting from the reddened sky. It was darkness huddled beneath a great brooding plant, the shape of a huge mushroom. "Is that a pine tree?" Lena asked the doctor. "Oak tree," the doctor said, so Lena understood that tree must mean all big plants, and they came in different kinds. A path led to a wooden gate which the doctor opened. They came to a shadowy, leaf-littered courtyard paved with uneven brick. On three sides there were three wings of the house, like a square-cornered U. The eaves of the roof sloped down to form a walkway all around. In the failing light, Lena could just see that the courtyard was crowded with plants, some growing in the ground and some in pots of all sizes. Vines wound up the columns, up the walkway, and crawled along the edge of the roof. "Come inside," the doctor said. She led the way to a door in the central part of the house. She and the boy went in. Lena stopped just inside the doorway, and Mrs. Mordeaux came up behind her, Poppy in her arms. They stood, peering into the gloom. There was an odd, pungent smell, like mushrooms or leaf mold, only sharper. The doctor disappeared for a moment, and when she came back, she held a lit candle. She moved around the room, lighting more. 2 candles, 3 candles, 4, until wavery light filled the central part of the room. The corners remained in darkness. Come in, the doctor said impatiently. Lena moved forward. She felt grit beneath the soles of her shoes, and the tickle of dust in her nose. She was in a long, low room with clutter everywhere. Clothes draped over the backs of armchairs, a shoe on a saggy couch, a plate with some bits of food on it sitting on the windowsill. At one end of the room there were 2 doors, both of them closed. At the back, a stairway rose into a dark, square hole in the ceiling. At the other end of the room, in the corner, was an open doorway, leading, Lena guessed, to the kitchen. Beside this doorway was a kind of hollow in the wall, framed by stones and containing some sticks and scraps of paper. The doctor stooped down before this hollow place and held her candle to the sticks and paper there. In a moment, a flame leapt up. It was a bigger flame than Lena had ever seen, like a terrible orange hand reaching up and out. Lena's heart knocked against her ribs. She stepped backwards, bumping into Mrs. Mordeaux. They stood staring. Mrs. Mordeaux, with a hand clutched around Lena's shoulder. The doctor turned around and saw them. "What's the matter?" she said. Lena couldn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the flame, which leapt higher and crackled. Mrs. Mordeaux tried to answer. It's... She inclined her head towards the end of the room, where the first flame had become a dozen flames, looking upwards, sending out flashes of orange light. "Oh," said the doctor, "the fire? You're not used to fire?" Mrs. Mordeaux managed to smile apologetically. Lena just stared. "It stays in the fireplace," the doctor said. "Not dangerous at all." In Ember, there was never fire unless there was danger. Someone's electrical wiring had frayed and ignited, or a pot holder had fallen on a stove's electric burner. The only fire Lena had seen that wasn't dangerous was the tiny flame of a candle. This fire scared her. In the window and the glass, reflections glimmered. The windows were set so deeply into the walls that there was a ledge at the bottom, wide enough to sit on. The boy, Torrin, hiked himself up on one of these ledges and sat there, kicking his feet against the cabinet set in the wall below. "Afraid of fire," he said in a low, scornful voice. "Come in," the doctor said. "You can sit over there if you like." She pointed to some chairs at the other end of the room, far from the fire. So that was where Lena and Mrs. Murdo sat. Poppy woke enough to give a weak wail and then slumped into Mrs. Murdo's lap. "This will likely be the last fire of the season anyway," said the doctor. "Nights will be getting warmer soon. We won't need one." A creak sounded from outside, and then rapid footsteps. Someone pounded on the door. Lena clutched Mrs. Murdo's hand, but the doctor only sighed and moved to the door. "Oh, it's you, William," she said. "What do you need?" "Some of that ointment," the man said. "I need it right now. My wife cut her hand. It's bleeding all over." Come in, I'll get it," the doctor said, and she went into another room and rummaged around, while the man stood shyly just inside the door looking out of the corner of his eyes at Lena and Mrs. Murdo. The doctor brought him a jar of ointment, and he went away. No more than 10 minutes later, another knock came, this time from a young woman who wanted some willow bark medicine for her sister, who had a pounding headache. Again the doctor rattled around in the other room. She came out with a small bottle, and the woman hurried off. "Are you the only doctor here?" Mrs. Murdo inquired. "Yes," said Dr. Hester. "It's a never-ending job." She suddenly looked worried. "Did I give William the right jar?" Yes. "The one on the 3rd shelf, I'm sure I did." She gave a frazzled sigh. "Now let's tend to your little girl. Put her down here." She patted the couch that stood against the wall. "And wrap her in this." She retrieved a knitted blanket that had fallen on the floor, gave it a shake, and handed it to Mrs. Murdo. "I'll give her a swallow of medicine." Poppy accepted 2 spoonfuls of medicine. It was something reddish that Dr. Hester poured from a jar and spit out the 3rd, whimpering. Lena's heart ached to see Poppy so sick. Most of the time, Poppy was a ball of energy, so quick and curious, you never knew what she'd do next. She might chew up a valuable document, for instance, or trot off on an exploration of her own at exactly the wrong moment. Now she was limp and pale, like a little sprout that hadn't been watered. Mrs. Murdo laid her on the bed. Lena sat by her, stroked her hair, and soon she went to sleep. The doctor disappeared into the kitchen, and Torrin climbed the stairs and vanished to the room above. All at once, Lena was overcome with tiredness. The disorderly house, the unfriendly boy, the fire, all of it was strange and disturbing, and Poppy was terribly sick, which worried Lena so much she felt a little sick herself. She sat down by Mrs. Murdo and laid her head on Mrs. Murdo's lap. She was vaguely aware of the clattering and chomping noises coming from the kitchen, and then she dozed off into a confusing dream of lights and shadows. "Dinner!" shouted Torrin. Lena bolted upright and he laughed. "Have you heard of food?" he said. "Have you heard of eating?" They sat at the table, all of them. But Poppy and the doctor ladled something out from a big bowl. Lena wasn't sure what it was. Cold potatoes, she thought, and something else. She ate it because she was hungry. But when she had eaten, she suddenly became so tired again that she could hardly move. "Quite tasty," said Mrs. Murdo. "Thank you." "Well," said the doctor, "certainly you're welcome." She started to stand up, and then sat down again, looking flustered. "Maybe you'd like to read? Or walk around? Or—" "We're a bit tired," said Mrs. Murdo. "Perhaps we could go to bed?" Dr. Hester's face brightened. "Bed, yes," she said, standing up. "Of course. Why didn't I— Let's see. Where will we put you?" She looked around as if an extra bed might be hidden in the mess. "The loft, I suppose." "No!" cried Torrin. "That's my room." "It's the only place with 2 beds," said Dr. Hester, picking up a candle. She made her way through the clutter to the stairway. "They'll touch my things! And Casper's things!" cried Torrin. "Don't be silly," said Dr. Hester. "But where will I sleep?" "In the medicine room," said Dr. Hester. Tears had appeared in Torrin's eyes, but the doctor didn't notice. She disappeared into the loft, and for a few minutes Lena heard thumps and scrapes from above. "Come on up," the doctor said. Lena climbed the stairs, and Mrs. Murdo came after her, carrying Poppy. By the light of the doctor's candle, Lena saw 2 beds under a sloped ceiling. There was a chest at the foot of each bed. Some clothes hung from hooks, and some boxes were neatly lined up on the sill of one window. 2 beds, but 3 of you," said the doctor, frowning. We could put the baby—" "It's all right," said Lena. "She'll sleep with me." A few minutes later, she was in bed, Poppy in the crook of her arm, covers drawn over them. "Good night," Mrs. Murdo said from the other bed, and the candle was blown out. The room went dark, but not as dark as the rooms in Ember at night. Lena could see a faint gray rectangle where the window was because of the light in the sky. The silver circle and the bright pinpoints. What are they called, she wondered? And who is Caspar? And how can the doctor stand to have such huge, awful fire right there on the floor of her house? Everything here was the opposite of Ember. Ember was dark and cold. This place was bright and hot. Ember was orderly. This place was disorderly. In Ember, everything was familiar to her. Here, everything was so strange. Will I learn to like it here, she wondered? Will I ever feel at home? She held Poppy tight against her and listened to her snuffily breathing for a long time before she fell asleep. End of chapter 4.